One quiet evening, four friends Lily, Max, Emma, and Jake sat around a campfire. They were talking about a place known as the Haunted Forest. The forest was famous for its strange stories, and many people said it was cursed. Max pulled out an old, yellowed map he found in his grandmother's attic. It showed a hidden path through the forest. "What if we explore it tonight?" Max asked, his voice full of excitement. The others agreed, even though they felt a little nervous. As the night grew darker, the wind began to howl. The moon was full, shining brightly above the trees. They packed their bags and headed toward the edge of the forest. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet night, and the trees seemed to watch them. The forest was known for its creepy sounds, but tonight, everything felt even more mysterious. It was as if something was waiting for them in the shadows. The friends walked deeper into the forest, their path lit only by the moon. The trees towered above them, casting long, dark shadows. Suddenly, Emma stopped and pointed to a strange mark on the ground. "Look, it's a symbol," she whispered. It was carved into the dirt, shaped like an eye. No one knew what it meant, but they felt uneasy. Jake suggested they keep moving, but Lily felt like something was watching them. As they continued, they began to hear faint whispers on the wind. The sounds seemed to come from all around them. Max tried to stay calm, but even he was starting to feel scared. The forest was so quiet during the day, but at night it felt alive, as if the trees and the ground were breathing. The whispers grew louder and closer, making their hearts race. They hurried along the path, hoping to find the end of the forest before something terrible happened. After walking for what felt like hours, the group stumbled upon an old stone house in the middle of the forest. Its windows were cracked, and the door hung open, creaking in the wind. "Should we go inside?" Max asked, his voice shaky. Emma didn't want to, but curiosity pushed her forward. They stepped inside the house, and the door slammed shut behind them with a loud bang. The house was cold and damp, and the air smelled of decay. As they moved deeper into the house, strange shadows moved across the walls. The shadows weren't cast by anything they could see. They looked like dark figures, and they seemed to follow the group wherever they went. Lily screamed as one of the shadows moved too close. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. They all agreed it was time to leave, but the door wouldn't open. They were trapped. Panic set in as the friends tried to force the door open. Suddenly, the house began to shake, and loud footsteps echoed through the walls. A deep voice whispered, "Leave now, or stay forever." The air grew colder, and strange voices filled the room. They heard names being called out from the shadows, names they didn't recognize. Max's heart pounded in his chest. "We need to get out of here," he shouted. Just as they turned to run, they saw a figure in the doorway. It was a woman dressed in white, her face hidden behind her long, dark hair. Her eyes glowed with a strange light, and she pointed toward the forest. "Follow the path," she whispered, "or be lost forever." The friends didn't know if it was a warning or a trap, but they ran toward the forest as fast as they could, the ghostly figure watching them leave. The friends ran through the forest, not looking back. The whispers were gone, but they could still feel the presence of something following them. They finally reached the edge of the forest, breathless and scared. The moon was low in the sky, and the house behind them disappeared into the shadows of the trees. They looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. Lily's voice was shaky as she spoke. "I don't know what that was, but I never want to go back there." Max nodded, still in shock. The forest was silent again, but the strange feeling stayed with them. They made a promise never to return to the haunted forest, and as they walked back home, they could still hear the wind whispering their names. That night, after returning home, Lily had trouble sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the haunted house and the glowing eyes of the woman in white. She woke up many times, feeling like she could still hear the whispers from the forest. The shadows from the house seemed to follow her into her dreams. When morning came, she felt tired and uneasy, as if the forest had never really let her go. Max also had a strange dream. In it, he was back in the forest, walking the path alone. He tried to call out for his friends, but his voice was lost in the wind. The shadows surrounded him, whispering his name, pulling him deeper into the forest. He woke up with a start, his heart racing, and couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still calling to him. A few days later, Max found the old map again. It was lying on his desk, even though he was sure he had put it away safely after their adventure. The map was no longer yellow and old. It looked new, as if it had been waiting for him to find it. The path on the map now seemed to glow faintly, and there was a new symbol and eye near the forest. Max's hands shook as he held the map, and a cold chill ran down his spine. Was the forest calling him again? He decided to tell his friends about the map. When he showed it to them, they all felt the same strange pull. "We have to go back," Jake said, his voice filled with fear and curiosity. The others weren't sure if they should go, but the map seemed to call them. With no other choice, they agreed to return to the forest and see what they had missed. As night fell, the four friends once again walked toward the haunted forest. This time the forest seemed darker, even though the moon was bright. They followed the glowing path shown on the map, and it led them deeper into the forest than before. The trees seemed to close in on them, and every step felt heavier than the last. Max held the map tightly, leading the way. The further they walked, the more the forest seemed alive. Strange sounds echoed from every direction, branches creaking, leaves rustling, and distant whispers that made their skin crawl. The shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, and it felt as though the forest was alive, watching them. "We shouldn't have come back," Emma whispered, but it was too late. They couldn't turn back now. Suddenly the wind picked up, carrying voices with it. They weren't clear, but they could hear their names being whispered through the trees. Lily. Max. Emma. Jake. The wind howled louder, and the friends huddled together, feeling the cold chill seep into their bones. Every whisper felt like it was coming from inside their heads. They tried to ignore it and kept moving forward, but the whispers grew louder and more urgent. Then, just ahead, they saw a glowing light in the distance. It wasn't the moon or stars. It was coming from the same house they had seen before. The lights flickered like a candle, and they could hear the sound of footsteps, but no one was there. It was as if the house was alive, calling them back to where it all started. The friends looked at each other, knowing they had no choice but to face the house once more. They reached the house, but this time the door was closed tightly. No wind, no noise, everything was silent. It felt as though the house had been waiting for them. The friends stood outside for a moment, unsure if they should enter. But before they could decide, the door creaked open slowly. A cold breeze rushed out, carrying a voice that was clear as day. "You have returned," the voice said. It was the woman in white. Her figure appeared in the doorway, her glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "You should not have come back," she warned them, her voice echoing through the night. The forest around them began to move, its trees shifting and groaning as if they were alive. The friends could feel the weight of the curse settling over them. They knew that whatever they had awakened in the forest could not be undone. As the woman in white stood before them, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The air grew colder, and the trees around them seemed to stretch higher, their branches twisting like dark fingers. "You have disturbed the forest's peace," the woman said, her voice both soft and frightening. "Now, you must face the consequences." Max's heart pounded as he glanced at his friends. They wanted to run, but their feet felt frozen, as if the forest had taken hold of them. The woman stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. "The forest has its guardians," she whispered. Suddenly, a soft growl echoed from behind them, and the friends spun around, only to see glowing eyes in the shadows. They weren't alone anymore. The glowing eyes grew closer, and the friends could see shapes moving within the darkness. Large, shadowy figures emerged from the trees, tall and dark, with long limbs. They weren't human, but they had the same eerie glow as the woman. The figures didn't speak, but they watched the friends closely, as though they were deciding what to do next. Lily gasped, clutching Max's arm tightly. "What are they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The guardians of the forest," the woman replied. "They protect the secrets hidden within these woods." The figures took slow, careful steps toward the group. "You must leave now, before it's too late," the woman added, her voice growing faint. The shadows seemed to grow even darker, and the air became thick with an unnatural silence. Without another word, the friends turned and ran. Their hearts raced as the sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty woods. The shadows followed them, getting closer with every step, but they refused to look back. Max led the way, the map clutched tightly in his hands. The forest seemed endless, and no matter how fast they ran, the path never seemed to end. Suddenly, they saw the moonlight shining through a gap in the trees. The edge of the forest was just ahead. They pushed themselves harder, knowing they had to escape. The shadows were almost upon them when they finally broke through the trees and into the open field. They stopped to catch their breath, looking back to see the forest standing still, as though nothing had happened. As they rested, the woman's voice echoed in the distance. "You have escaped for now," she said, her tone warning yet calm. "But remember, the forest never forgets." The friends shivered, knowing her words were not empty. The forest would always be there, waiting for them. They turned away, heading toward their homes, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching them. "Do you think it's over?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. Max shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't think we should ever go back there," they all agreed. The experience had left them shaken, and they didn't want to risk facing the forest's curse again. But deep down, each of them knew that the forest shadows might still follow them, no matter where they went. The next day, the friends gathered one last time to talk about what had happened. They all agreed to never speak of the forest again, but they couldn't forget what they had seen. The woman in white, the shadows, and the strange guardians of the forest were now a part of their past, something they could never erase. As the days went by, they returned to their normal lives, but every once in a while, they would catch a glimpse of something strange in the corner of their eyes, shadows that seemed to move on their own, whispers that faded in the wind. The forest had left its mark on them, And no matter how far they went, they knew the haunted woods would always be a part of their story. And so, they lived, always looking over their shoulders, wondering if the forest would ever call them again. Months passed, and life seemed to return to normal for Max, Lily, Emma, and Jake. Yet, every now and then, they would find themselves thinking about the forest. It never truly left their minds. One day, Max found the map again, the same old map they had once followed. But this time, it was different. It wasn't glowing or new. It was old and worn, just like it had been before. But there was something strange written on it now. Returned to the forest. Max couldn't explain why, but he felt a strange pull. He showed the map to his friends, and they all agreed they had to go back. This time, though, they knew better. They would be prepared for whatever waited for them in the forest. The night they decided to return, the forest seemed different. The air was still and cold, with no sound of animals or insects. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As they walked deeper into the woods, the path from the map appeared, just like last time. But it was hidden, covered by overgrown plants and twisted trees. They had to clear the path to continue, and the forest seemed to resist them. Max led the way, the map in his hands, but he felt the weight of every step. The whispers from before had returned, softer this time, almost like they were teasing them. "This isn't a good idea," Lily whispered, looking around nervously. But it was too late. The path ahead was clearer, and they had no choice but to continue. After hours of walking, they came to the familiar clearing. The house stood before them, just as they remembered. It looked older, darker, and more decayed. The windows were broken, and the door creaked on its hinges. But they knew they had to enter. The house had a pull on them, something they couldn't explain, as though it was calling them back. They entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The air inside was cold and musty, filled with dust and forgotten memories. As they walked deeper into the house, they found themselves in a dark room, where the walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings. At the center of the room stood an old, cracked mirror. It reflected nothing but shadows, and the whispers seemed to come from within it. Max stepped closer to the mirror, feeling drawn to it. He reached out and touched the cold glass. The moment his fingers made contact, the mirror began to glow. Strange images flashed before their eyes, visions of the forest, the woman in white, and the shadows that had followed them. It was as though the mirror was showing them the past and the future, the truth they had been searching for. Suddenly, the woman in white appeared in the mirror. Her eyes locked with theirs, and she smiled eerily. "You should never have come back," she whispered. "The forest has been waiting." The room grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, surrounding them. The mirror seemed to pull them in, and for a moment it felt like the room was closing in on them. The friends looked at each other, fear in their eyes. The mirror had shown them something terrible. They knew the forest would never let them go. It had been waiting for their return, and they couldn't escape its hold. But what if they could end it? What if there was a way to break the curse forever? "We need to destroy the mirror," Jake said, his voice steady. The others agreed. They couldn't let the forest win. They found a heavy object and smashed the mirror into pieces. As the glass shattered, the room seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The whispers stopped, and the air grew still again. But deep down, they knew the battle wasn't over. The forest still called to them, and the curse might never truly be broken. As they left the house, they promised never to return. but as they walked away, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them from the shadows. That night, as Max lay in his bed, he had a strange and unsettling dream. The forest called to him, and he could hear the whispers again, faint but clear. In his dream, the woman in white stood in front of him, her face shrouded in shadow. "You cannot escape what you have awakened," she whispered. "The forest will always find you." Max woke up with a start, sweating and breathless. He looked around, but everything seemed normal. His room was quiet, the night still. But the feeling of being watched lingered. He couldn't shake the images from the dream, and the whispers seemed to echo in his mind. The next morning, Max gathered his friends at their usual spot, a small cafe in town. He told them about the dream and how the whispers had returned. They all agreed that something wasn't right. The forest had marked them, and now it seemed like the curse had followed them back into their everyday lives. As they talked, a cold breeze swept through the cafe, and the lights flickered. Everyone looked around, confused. "It's just a power surge," Jake said, trying to sound calm. But deep down, they all knew something more sinister was at play. They were being watched, and they couldn't escape it. Later that evening, the friends decided to return to the forest one last time. They had to confront whatever was following them. The whispers had grown louder, and they knew they couldn't ignore it anymore. The forest had a hold on them, and it would never let them go unless they faced it head-on. As they entered the forest once more, the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting and shifting. The ground felt softer, as though it was swallowing them whole. The familiar path was now gone, replaced by a dark maze of trees. It was as if the forest had changed overnight, adapting to their return. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something dark. The woman in white appeared again, this time standing in the center of the path, blocking their way. Her eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and her voice echoed through the trees. "You should never have come back," she said, her tone colder than before. "The forest is not just a place, it is a curse. And now you belong to it." Max stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "We won't leave until we stop this. We won't be your prisoners." The woman smiled, a slow, eerie smile. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You are already bound to the forest. There is no escaping it now." With a flick of her hand, the trees around them began to shift, and the path ahead disappeared into darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The shadows from before emerged again, tall, dark figures moving silently between the trees. The guardians of the forest had awoken. They surrounded the friends, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. They had no choice but to face them. "Why are you doing this?" Lily asked, her voice shaking with fear. One of the guardians stepped forward, its glowing eyes locked on her. "The forest must be protected," it said in a deep, guttural voice. "You have disturbed the balance, and now you must pay the price." The others backed away, fear taking over. But Max stood firm. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. "We will find a way to end this curse." With the guardians closing in, Max, Lily, Emma, and Jake prepared for the final confrontation. The woman in white watched from the shadows, her smile growing wider. "There is no hope for you," she whispered. "The forest is eternal," but the friends refused to give up. Max raised the broken pieces of the mirror they had destroyed earlier. As the shards glowed faintly, they realized it was the only way to stop the forest's curse. With all their strength, they hurled the pieces into the center of the forest. The shards flew into the air, and for a moment, everything stopped. The guardians froze, the air grew still, and the woman's smile faded. The forest seemed to scream in pain, but the friends stood their ground. The shards of the mirror shattered, releasing a burst of light that blinded everything around them. When the light faded, the forest was silent. The guardians were gone, and the woman in white had vanished. The curse had been broken, but the friends knew that the forest's power would never be truly gone. They had won, but it had come at a great cost. As they walked away from the clearing, they promised never to return to the haunted woods again. The days following the battle in the forest felt like a strange dream. Max, Lily, Emma, and Jake tried to return to their normal lives, but something had changed inside them. The memories of the forest, the woman in white, and the guardian stayed with them, haunting their thoughts. Yet the forest itself remained still, as if it had been put to sleep. But deep down, Max knew it wasn't truly over. The forest's curse may have been broken for now, but its power lingered in the shadows. Every now and then, they would hear whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling to them. It was as if the forest was waiting, biding its time until it could return. One night, as Max was walking home, he found a small, old notebook lying on the ground. It was weathered and covered in dust, as though it had been there for years. Opening it, he saw strange symbols and drawings just like the ones in the old house. As he flipped through the pages, one note stood out. It was a warning. The forest never forgets, it read. It waits for those who dare to disturb it. The curse may be broken, but it will rise again. Beware, for the next time it may claim everything. Max felt his heart race as he read the words. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest's hold on them wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Max shared the notebook with his friends, and they gathered at their usual spot in the cafe. The warning in the notebook made them all uneasy. They tried to move on with their lives, but the whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to move around them. One evening, as they walked through town, they noticed the shadows stretching longer than usual. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie shapes on the ground. The air felt heavy, as though something was watching them. "The forest is still out there," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "It hasn't forgotten us." That night, as the friends walked through the quiet town, they saw a figure standing in the distance. It was the woman in white. Her figure was faint, almost like a shadow, but they all recognized her. She was waiting for them, just as she had done in the forest. "You cannot escape me," she whispered, her voice like the wind. "The forest has claimed you. You belong to it now." The friends stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The woman's eyes glowed in the darkness, and the trees seemed to sway in the distance, as though calling them back. Max could feel the pull of the forest once again. Max and his friends ran, not daring to look back. The woman in white was gone, but the danger was still there. They knew the forest's curse hadn't been broken completely. It was waiting for them to make a mistake, to give in to its power. The next few days were filled with strange occurrences. Shadows followed them, and every corner of town seemed to hide a secret. Max kept hearing the whispers in the back of his mind, calling him to the forest. The forest was watching them, waiting for them to return. The group met again, this time in a secluded spot far from the forest. They knew what had to be done. They had tried to escape the forest, but it was always there, lingering in the back of their minds. The curse was never truly gone, and they had to face it one last time. "We can't keep running," Max said, his voice steady. "We need to go back to the forest. This time we end it for good." His friends nodded in agreement. The forest had haunted them for far too long, and they couldn't let it control their lives anymore. It was time to return and face the darkness once again. The friends stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. The trees seemed to whisper, their branches swaying as if they knew they were about to face the group again. Max felt a chill run down his spine, but there was no turning back now. They had come to end this once and for all. Lily took a deep breath, her eyes filled with determination. "We know what we have to do," she said. "No more running, no more fear. Tonight, it ends with that." They stepped forward, the dark forest welcoming them like an old friend, ready to test their resolve once more. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. The path, which had once been familiar, now felt foreign and twisted. Max led the way, trying to ignore the whispers growing louder in his mind. Every step seemed heavier, as though the forest itself was trying to hold them back. "Stay close," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it feels different now." The trees seemed to shift around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. But they pressed on, knowing they had no choice but to confront what was waiting for them at the heart of the forest. Suddenly, the air grew still, and the whispers stopped. The friends froze, sensing a presence before they even saw her. The woman in white appeared before them, standing tall and calm, her eyes glowing in the darkness. "You came back," she said softly, her voice like a lullaby. "But it will do you no good. You cannot defeat the forest." Max stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We're not afraid of you anymore. We know what you are. We know what this place is." The woman's smile faded, and her expression turned cold. "You may think you understand," she said, "but the forest is older than you can imagine. It will never release you." As the woman spoke, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The trees around them groaned, their roots shifting and twisting like snakes. The friends felt a pull as though the forest was trying to swallow them whole. But Max held his ground. "We're not leaving until this is over," he said, his voice firm. The woman in white raised her hand, and the shadows around them deepened. "Then you will die with the forest," she whispered. But before she could do anything, Max reached into his pocket and pulled out the shard of the broken mirror they had carried before. The shards had power, and now they would use it to end the curse once and for all. With a loud, echoing crack, the shard of the mirror glowed brightly in Max's hand. The light cut through the darkness, sending the shadows fleeing. The woman in white screamed as the light grew stronger, blinding her. The trees shook their twisted branches, screaming in pain as the light spread through the forest. "You cannot fight it," the woman screamed. "This is my home. You have no power here." But the more she struggled, the brighter the light became. The forest groaned and twisted as if the very earth itself was trying to fight back. The curse was weakening, but it wasn't over yet. Max knew they had to keep going. The light from the mirror shard reached the heart of the forest, and everything stopped. The trees stilled and the whispers fell silent. The woman in white, once so powerful, collapsed to her knees, her form flickering like a shadow. "It's over," Max whispered, his voice full of exhaustion. With a final, deafening roar, The forest let out its last breath. The trees groaned one final time, and the woman in white faded into nothingness. The curse had been broken. The forest, once dark and cursed, was now silent. The friends stood there, surrounded by the stillness, knowing they had won but at a cost. They had faced the darkness and come out alive, but the memory of the haunted forest would never leave them. As the friends slowly made their way out of the forest, the first light of dawn broke through the trees. The world around them felt different, quieter, almost as if the land had been given a chance to heal. The darkness that had once filled the forest was gone, and with it, the haunting presence that had followed them for so long. They walked in silence, each of them reflecting on what they had just faced. The battle was over, but the memories would stay with them forever. Max couldn't help but think about the woman in white. Was she truly gone, or would she someday return? He shook off the thought, knowing they had done everything they could. The friends arrived at the edge of the forest, where the town lay ahead of them. It looked the same, yet it felt different, as if the shadows of the past had lifted. As they stood there, they realized that they had changed. They were no longer the same group of kids who had ventured into the forest months ago. They had grown stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. "We did it," Lily said, breaking the silence. "We really did it," the others nodded, but no one spoke for a while. The forest behind them seemed peaceful now, but each of them knew that they had only survived because they had worked together. The forest's curse was gone, but the bond they had formed would last forever. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal. Max went back to school, and Emma and Jake picked up their usual routines. But as much as they tried to move on, the memory of the forest lingered. Late at night, Max would sometimes hear the faintest of whispers, the same whispers that had haunted him in the forest. One evening, as he sat by his window, he heard something strange as soft, distant calling from the direction of the forest. His heart raced as he listened, unsure if it was real or just his imagination. He stood up, but the calling stopped. It was gone as quickly as it had come. Had the forest truly released its grip on him, or was something else still out there? Max couldn't shake the feeling that the forest wasn't finished with him. He spoke to Lily, Emma, and Jake about what he had heard, but they were skeptical. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," Emma said. "We've been through enough." The forest is behind us, but Max wasn't convinced. The calling had felt too real, too powerful. "I need to know for sure," Max said, determined. "I have to go back. Maybe the forest has something else to teach us." The others were hesitant, but they could see the resolve in Max's eyes. After all they had been through, they knew they couldn't let him face whatever it was alone. The four friends found themselves back at the edge of the forest once again. The trees stood silent, their twisted branches casting long shadows in the moonlight. The forest seemed unchanged, yet Max felt the familiar pull like an invisible force calling him inside. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, thicker. The trees appeared more sinister than before, their faces twisted and gnarled. It was as though the forest was waiting for them, anticipating their return. Max's heart raced, but he couldn't turn back now. They had come this far, and they had to finish what they started. At the heart of the forest, they found an ancient stone altar, hidden beneath layers of moss and vines. Max approached it slowly, the feeling of unease growing stronger with each step. There, etched into the stone, were the same symbols from the notebook, the ones they had seen before in the old house. As Max ran his fingers over the carvings, a sudden flash of light engulfed the area. The woman in white appeared before them again, but this time she was different. Her form flickered as if caught between two worlds. "You have come seeking answers," she said, her voice distant. "But some truths are too dangerous to know." Max stepped forward, his voice shaking. "What is the truth? What does this forest want from us?" The woman in white's expression softened, but her eyes were filled with sorrow. "The forest is not a place of evil," she whispered. "It is a place of balance, a place where the living and the dead meet. It has been cursed for centuries, but not by any one person. The curse is part of its nature, a price for keeping the balance." She paused, her form flickering again. "The real question is, are you ready to accept the truth, knowing that it will change everything?" The woman in white's words echoed in their minds as they stood before the ancient altar. Max felt a sense of dread in his chest, but he couldn't turn away. "What happens if we don't accept the truth?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman in white looked at them with sadness in her eyes. "The forest will never release you. The curse will remain, and you will be trapped in this endless cycle, forever bound to the shadows of the past." Her voice trembled. "But if you choose to accept it, you must bear the weight of knowing what lies beneath this world." The friends exchanged uneasy glances. The truth was terrifying, yet they knew they had to make a decision. No matter the consequences, they could not walk away from it now. Max took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the symbols on the stone altar. Suddenly, the world around them seemed to shift. The trees, the ground, even the air felt different, as though they were being pulled into another dimension. The woman in white's form flickered, and for a moment, Max thought she might disappear again. "This is the heart of the forest," she said softly. "Here, the past and present collide. What you have learned is only a fraction of the truth. The forest was never truly evil. It is a protector of the balance between life and death. Those who enter it without understanding pay the price, but only because they disrupt that balance." The truth felt like a heavy weight on their hearts. The forest was not a place of darkness, but of protection, a place where the dead and the living coexisted. The curse had been a punishment for those who disturbed its peace. The weight of that knowledge was almost too much to bear. Lily stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "If the forest protects the balance between life and death, what must we do to end this curse?" she asked. The woman in white looked at them with deep sorrow. "There must be a sacrifice," she whispered. "A willing soul to restore the balance, someone who understands the price of the curse and is willing to give everything for the forest to be free. Only then can the shadows be lifted for good." Max's heart sank as he realized what that meant. A sacrifice. One of them would have to stay behind to give their life, their soul, to the forest. The group was silent for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. "None of us are ready to make that sacrifice," Jake said quietly, his voice full of fear. "But if it's the only way to set things right," he trailed off, his words heavy with the reality of what was being asked. Max looked at each of his friends, seeing the same fear in their eyes. But there was also something else, something stronger. They had already faced so much together, survived the horrors of the forest, and now they had to face the hardest decision of all. "We can't leave it like this," Max said, his voice filled with resolve. "We came this far together. We have to finish it together." His friends nodded in agreement, understanding that the only way out was to give up something precious to them. The woman in white watched them silently, her form fading in and out like the wind. You must choose now. The forest will not wait much longer, her voice echoed in the air, and the trees seemed to lean in, listening. Max stepped forward, his heart pounding. I will stay, he said, his voice trembling. The others gasped, but Max held up his hand. I have to. I'm the one who first felt the calling. The forest chose me. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. We understand, Max. You've led us this far. If this is your choice, we will stand by you. Max closed his eyes, his heart heavy but his mind clear. I accept my fate, he whispered. I will be the one to restore the balance. The woman in white smiled softly, and the ground beneath Max's feet began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. As the light enveloped him, Max felt a sense of peace wash over him. The forest, the woman in white, everything seemed to fade away, and for a brief moment he was no longer part of this world. He had given his soul to the forest, to the balance, and in doing so, he had set it free. The others stood back, their hearts broken but filled with gratitude. The curse was lifted. The forest was free. Max's sacrifice was felt across the forest. The shadows that had once hung thick in the trees began to dissipate, and the soft light of dawn bathed the forest floor. The whispers of the past faded into silence, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the forest was peaceful. Lily, Emma, and Jake stood still, their hearts heavy with grief but also filled with a sense of relief. The air felt lighter, and the once dark forest seemed to come alive with new energy. Max had given everything for this moment. His sacrifice had saved them all. The friends stood at the edge of the forest, looking back one last time. The trees were no longer twisted and dark, they were green and full of life, their branches stretching toward the sky as if reaching for the sun. The haunting presence had been lifted, and the forest was finally at peace. I can't believe he's gone, Emma whispered, her voice breaking. But he did it. He saved us all, Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He gave everything for us. We'll never forget him. The three of them stood in silence, knowing that they would carry Max's memory with them forever. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal. The town, which had been living in fear of the haunted forest for so long, began to rebuild. People no longer whispered about the curse or the dark forest. The place that had once been feared was now a source of life and growth, thanks to Max's sacrifice. The friends went back to their lives, each of them trying to move forward while carrying the weight of what had happened. But they knew that they would always be connected by the events of that night, a bond that could never be broken. They had faced the darkness together and survived, and they would never forget the one who had given his life to set them free. Max's story, however, was not one that could be easily forgotten. The forest, now calm and peaceful, still held a strange energy. Occasionally, late at night, Lily would hear a soft whisper in the wind, as though Max's spirit was still watching over them. It wasn't a haunting whisper, but a comforting one. They continued to visit the forest, not to relive the past, but to honor the memory of the one who had saved them all. Max's legacy lived on in the beauty of the forest, in the peace it now offered to all who entered. The seasons changed, and the forest grew quieter with each passing year. The whispering winds, the rustling leaves, and the gentle sway of the trees became a lullaby, reminding all who listened of the balance that had been restored. Lily stood at the edge of the forest, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting. She felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known before. The darkness was gone and the forest was free. Max had done it. He had saved them all. As she turned to walk away, she felt a gentle breeze against her face like a soft caress. She smiled, knowing that Max was still with them, watching over the forest he had given his life to protect. The forest was no longer haunted. It was home. Years had passed since Max's sacrifice, but his memory was still alive in the hearts of those who had known him. The town had changed, the forest had healed, and life moved forward. But every year on the anniversary of Max's sacrifice, Lily, Jake, and Emma would return to the forest, to the place where everything had begun. As they stood at the entrance of the forest, now vibrant and full of life, Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. "We owe it all to Max," she whispered. "This place is peaceful now because of him." Jake and Emma nodded, each of them silently remembering their friend. They had all changed over the years, but the bond they shared, one formed through the darkest of times, would never fade. The forest, once a place of fear and shadows, now flourished. The trees stood tall and strong, their leaves dancing in the breeze, and the wildlife thrived in the untouched beauty of the land. The curse had been broken, and the forest had found its balance. One evening, as the sun began to set, a soft glow appeared near the heart of the forest. It was faint at first, like a distant star. But as the friends moved closer, they realized it was not a star at all. It was Max's spirit, shimmering gently in the fading light. "We thought you had left us," Emma whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Max's spirit smiled warmly, his presence a comforting embrace. "I never left. I'm always here, in the wind, in the trees, and in your hearts. The forest is free now, and so am I." As the friends stood in the quiet of the forest, the wind began to whisper softly around them. It was a familiar sound, one they had heard before, but this time it wasn't full of dread. Instead, it was filled with peace. Lily closed her eyes, listening to the whispers. She could hear Max's voice, faint but clear. "You have all grown. You've become stronger because of the choices you made. The forest will always remember you." The trees swayed and the leaves rustled gently. It was as though the forest itself was speaking to them, thanking them for their bravery, their loyalty, and their love for their friend. Max's sacrifice had saved the forest, and in return, the forest had become a sanctuary for all who respected its power. The forest was now a peaceful place, but every so often people would come to visit, hoping to experience its magic. On one such visit, a group of hikers entered the forest, unaware of the past that lay hidden beneath its calm exterior. As they walked deeper into the woods, they felt an unease, a lingering presence that made their steps falter. "Is it just me, or does this place feel different?" one of them asked, looking around nervously. The others laughed, dismissing the feeling as nothing more than superstition. But the deeper they ventured, the stronger the sense of being watched became. It was as though the forest remembered them, the ones who had once disturbed its peace. Max's spirit lingered, watching over the forest he had protected. He had given up everything to restore balance, and in return, the forest had granted him eternal peace. His soul now wandered through the trees, a silent guardian, ensuring that the forest would never fall into darkness again. The hikers, still feeling the weight of the forest's energy, turned to leave. They had heard the stories of the haunted forest, but they never truly understood the truth until now. The forest was not just a place of danger, it was a place of protection, and Max was its eternal protector. As the years continued to pass, the forest remained a peaceful and thriving place. The town that once lived in fear now embraced the forest, and the whispers of the past faded into legend. Max's sacrifice had not only saved them, but had brought peace to the land for generations to come. One day, as the sun began to set, Lily, Jake, and Emma returned to the forest for the final time. They stood together at the entrance, feeling the warmth of the place they had once feared. The forest had healed, and so had they. "We'll carry his memory with us," always Lily said softly. The wind blew gently, as if in agreement, and the trees rustled around them. The forest had found peace, and with it, so had they. The circle of life had come full circle, and the forest would continue to stand tall, forever protected by the spirit of their dear friend, Max. One quiet morning, a soft mist rolled over the forest. The air felt different, almost magical, as if the forest was holding its breath. It had been years since Max's sacrifice, yet the forest still carried a sense of wonder and mystery. Lily, Jake, and Emma walked slowly through the woods, reflecting on how far they had come. They were no longer the scared children they once were. They had grown stronger and wiser, and the forest had played a big part in that. As they reached the old clearing where Max had made his sacrifice, they stopped and stood in silence. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Jake asked, looking up at the trees that now seemed so peaceful. "I think about it every day," Lily replied softly. "But now I know that everything happened for a reason." As they stood in the clearing, a sudden breeze swept through the trees, and the leaves began to rustle gently. The sound was different now. It wasn't eerie, but calming. The forest felt alive, as if it had a heartbeat. It was as if Max's spirit was still there, watching over them. Emma smiled and closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her. "It's like Max is still here with us," she said, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and peace. The wind picked up, and for a moment, they all thought they heard something, a soft whisper in the breeze. "Thank you," the voice seemed to say. It was faint, but it was there. The forest had never forgotten, and neither had they. As the trio stood in the heart of the forest, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath them seemed to glow, and small flowers began to bloom around their feet. It was as if the forest was thanking them for everything they had done. The once dark and twisted woods had transformed into a lush, vibrant paradise. Lily bent down and touched one of the flowers. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its petals shimmered with a soft, golden light. She knew, without a doubt, that this was the forest's final gift to them. "It's beautiful," Jake whispered, kneeling beside her. "It's a sign that Max's spirit is at rest." Emma, too, reached out to touch the flowers. "We'll never forget what he did for us. This place will always remind us of him." Despite the peace the forest now held, something still lingered in the shadows. The friends often wondered if Max's spirit was truly gone, or if he still watched over the forest, ensuring that no harm would come to it again. One evening, as they sat around a campfire near the edge of the forest, Lily noticed something strange. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at them from the trees, flickering in the darkness. "Is that?" she began, but she couldn't finish her sentence. But as they stared into the night, the eyes slowly faded, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. They all felt a sense of comfort, knowing that Max's spirit would always protect the forest, no matter what. Years later, the forest had become a place of pilgrimage for those who sought peace and healing. People from all over the world visited, drawn by the story of the haunted forest and the sacrifice that had saved it. Lily, Jake, and Emma had grown older, but they never stopped visiting. They had become the new guardians of the forest, protecting its secrets and ensuring that Max's legacy lived on. They often told the story of how they had faced the darkness and won, inspiring others to believe in the power of friendship and sacrifice. Max would be proud of what we've done, Lily said one evening, sitting at the edge of the forest. We've given this place a new purpose, Emma added. The forest, once a place of fear, was now a sanctuary, a symbol of hope and strength. And as the sun set on another peaceful day, the three friends knew they would continue to protect it, just as Max had done before them. And so, the haunted forest remained a place of peace, watched over by the spirits of those who had given their lives to protect it. The whispers in the trees were no longer filled with fear, but with gratitude and love. The once dark forest had become a beacon of light, where all who entered could feel safe and at home. Max's spirit had found its rest, but his legacy lived on in the hearts of those who remembered him. The forest had been saved, and it would forever be a reminder of the power of courage, sacrifice, and friendship. As the years passed, the forest continued to thrive, its beauty untouched and its mystery preserved. And in the hearts of those who had once walked its haunted paths, there would always be a quiet understanding and knowing that some stories, no matter how dark, have the power to transform into something beautiful. As the years passed, fewer people ventured into the forest, and the once bustling town nearby grew quieter. The haunted history of the forest faded into the past, becoming just another story told around campfires. But deep in the woods, something still stirred. One evening, a curious traveler entered the forest, drawn by the legend of the haunted woods. She had heard the whispers about the curse and the spirit of Max who protected it. But she didn't believe in ghosts, at least, not until she set foot on the forgotten path that no one had dared to take in years. The moment her feet touched the path, a cold wind swept through the trees. She shivered, unsure if it was just the breeze or something more. I should turn back, she thought, but something about the path called to her. The traveler continued along the path, the trees towering above her, their branches whispering secrets. The deeper she walked, the stronger the feeling that she wasn't alone grew. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing. Still, the sensation lingered, a presence watching her every move. As she reached the heart of the forest, a soft rustling caught her attention. She turned to find nothing but the darkness of the woods. But the air around her grew thick, and a sudden feeling of unease washed over her. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling slightly. No answer came, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. The forest was alive with something beyond her understanding. As the traveler stood frozen, a faint shadow appeared in the distance, slowly taking shape as it moved toward her. The mist that had once seemed innocent now curled around her feet, thickening with each passing second. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was this the spirit of Max? Or had she ventured too far into the forgotten parts of the forest, where even the bravest dare not go? She took a step back, but the shadow seemed to follow her every movement. A soft voice, almost like a whisper in the wind, spoke from the shadow. "You have come seeking something. But what is it you truly seek?" The traveler's breath caught in her throat. I'm looking for the truth about the forest," she stammered. "Is it haunted? Is the spirit still here?" The shadow moved closer, and the mist began to swirl around it, revealing a faint glow. The voice spoke again, gentle but firm. The forest is no longer haunted. The darkness that once lived here has been freed, but its memory remains. The truth you seek is not one of fear, but of peace. The traveler's fear began to subside as the forest seemed to come alive around her. The trees whispered, the leaves rustled, and the air felt lighter, as though the forest was sharing its wisdom with her. "You've come at a time of renewal," the voice continued. "The forest has healed, and so has its guardian." The traveler nodded, understanding. She had come to uncover the history, but what she had found was much more than she expected. The forest was not just haunted, it was a living memory, a testament to the courage and love of those who had saved it. As the voice faded into the air, the traveler was left alone in the heart of the forest, surrounded by a calm that seemed to reach into her soul. But just as she thought the mystery was over, she heard a rustling behind her. Turning quickly, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. This time it wasn't just a shadow, but a form tall, ethereal, and glowing softly in the moonlight. She felt a chill run down her spine, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something different: respect. The figure stepped forward, and the traveler saw the face of Max, not as a ghost, but as a peaceful spirit. He smiled at her, and his voice filled the air. "You have learned the truth. The forest will always remember those who protect it." The traveler bowed her head, feeling honored. She understood now the forest was not a place of danger, but of healing and strength. And Max, the guardian, would continue to watch over it forever. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the traveler found her way back to the edge of the forest. She turned one last time, looking at the woods that had both frightened and welcomed her. The forest was peaceful once again, and the whispers of the past had faded into the wind. She left the forest with a new understanding, knowing that some places held more than just stories. They carried the legacies of those who had given everything to protect them. Max's spirit had not only protected the forest, but had created a legacy that would live on for generations to come. The traveler returned to the town, sharing the story of what she had learned. And from that day on, the forest was no longer just a place of mystery. It became a symbol of hope, healing, and the enduring power of friendship and sacrifice. The years passed, and the town near the forest slowly began to flourish again. People spoke of the haunted forest not in fear, but with awe. It became a place of inspiration for many, a reminder of how a dark past could turn into a beautiful legacy. One crisp autumn day, a new group of travelers arrived at the town. They had heard the stories, the legends, and the whispers of the haunted forest, but they were not afraid. They sought to understand the forest's true nature, its healing power, and the mysteries it held. As they walked toward the edge of the woods, an old man, a former guardian of the town, greeted them. "The forest has changed, but it will always hold a piece of its history," he said with a smile. "If you truly wish to understand, you must listen to what it has to teach." The travelers followed the old man as he led them deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to part for them, guiding their way through the once dark and haunting paths. Now, the forest was full of life. Bright flowers bloomed, and birds chirped in the branches above. "Do you feel it?" one of the travelers asked, stopping to look around. "It's not just a forest. It's alive, like it has a soul." The old man nodded. "The forest has a spirit, and it remembers those who have come before you. Max's spirit may have faded, but his legacy lives in the roots of these trees." In the whispers of the wind as they walked, the travelers felt a deep connection to the forest, as if the land itself was welcoming them home. As they ventured deeper, They arrived at the clearing where Max had made his sacrifice. It was quiet now, peaceful, with no trace of the darkness that had once consumed it. The flowers were still in bloom, their petals glowing softly in the moonlight. "Do you think Max's spirit will ever leave?" one of the travelers asked softly, gazing at the glowing flowers. The old man smiled gently. "Max is the guardian of this place. He's not gone. He's always here, watching over the forest. But now the forest belongs to everyone who respects it." He knelt beside the flowers and touched one. "This is the promise he made to protect the forest for all time. And it's a promise that lives on, in every leaf, in every leaf, in every tree." As they stood in the clearing, the wind suddenly shifted, and the trees seemed to sway in unison. The travelers looked around, unsure of what was happening. But the old man merely nodded, as though expecting it. The air grew still, and for a moment everything went quiet. Then, a soft, familiar voice whispered through the trees. "Thank you," it said, like a breath on the wind. "Thank you for keeping my promise." The travelers felt their hearts flutter with recognition. They knew, without a doubt, that it was Max's spirit still watching over the forest, still guarding it with the same love and courage he had shown years before. The travelers stood in silence, listening to the whispers of the forest. The wind carried with it a sense of calm, and they could feel the forest's healing power flowing through them. It was as if the trees themselves were speaking to their hearts, offering them peace and strength. One of the travelers, a young woman, closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I feel so much better," she whispered. "This place, it's like it's healing something inside me." The old man nodded. "The forest has that power. It heals the soul, just as it healed itself. But you must come with respect and understanding. The forest does not give its gifts to those who do not honor it." As the travelers made their way back to the town, the forest seemed to fade into the background, its secrets and magic now a part of them. They carried with them the lessons they had learned, the understanding that the forest was not something to fear, but something to protect. The old man smiled as they reached the edge of the forest. "You are now part of the forest's story," he said, "and the forest's story will continue for generations to come." The travelers nodded, grateful for the experience and the wisdom they had gained. And as they looked back one final time, they saw the trees sway gently in the breeze, a quiet reminder that the spirit of the forest would live on forever. As the seasons changed, the forest remained a place of peace. The travelers who had learned its secrets went back to their lives, but the memory of the forest stayed with them. Over time, more and more people visited, not to uncover its mysteries, but to appreciate its beauty and the magic that lived within. The old man who had guided them grew older and passed his knowledge to the next generation. He chose a young girl who had always loved the woods as his successor. She would be the new guardian, tasked with protecting the forest and keeping its legacy alive. The new guardian promised to care for the forest just as Max had. She knew that the forest was not just a place, but a living memory, one that would need protection for many years to come. With the new guardian in place, the forest flourished even more. The town grew closer to the woods, and the people began to see it as a source of life, not fear. The stories of Max and the haunted past were passed down, but now they were told as tales of bravery, love, and peace. The young guardian, with the support of the townsfolk, planted new trees and nurtured the old ones. They rebuilt the paths, ensuring that visitors could experience the magic of the forest safely. It became a sanctuary, a place where people came not only to learn about the past but to find healing and connection. And with each passing year, the legend of the haunted forest became a story of hope and renewal. One quiet evening, as the sun began to set, the young guardian stood at the edge of the forest, gazing at the trees. She could feel the presence of Max, his spirit still watching over the land. Though he was gone, his love for the forest had not faded. It lived on in the very air she breathed. As she stood there, she felt a faint whisper, like the wind speaking her name. She smiled, knowing it was Max's spirit thanking her for keeping the forest alive. "I won't let you down," she whispered back. "The forest will always be safe." The trees around her seemed to respond, their leaves rustling softly, as if agreeing with her promise. The town, now fully united with the forest, decided to hold a grand celebration. It was a festival in honor of the forest's healing, its guardians, and the brave souls who had fought to protect it. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The new guardian stood at the heart of the celebration, surrounded by friends, families, and travelers from all over. They sang songs of the forest, danced beneath the stars, and shared stories of Max and the legacy he had left behind. It was a night to remember, one that would be passed down through generations as a reminder of the forest's power to heal and unite. As the night wore on, the guests gathered around a large bonfire. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the trees, and the whispers of the forest grew louder. It was as though the forest itself was speaking, sharing its secrets with those who had come to listen. The young guardian stood by the fire, feeling the weight of her responsibility. She had heard the whispers all her life, but tonight they were different. The voices of the past seemed to join with the voices of the present, creating a harmony that filled her heart. "This forest," she whispered, "is not just haunted by memories. It is alive with the hopes of those who have come before us." The trees swayed gently in the wind, as if agreeing with her words. As the celebration came to a close, the guests made their way back to the town, leaving the forest in peace once more. The young guardian remained behind, standing silently among the trees. She looked around at the peaceful woods, feeling the presence of all those who had ever loved this place. Max's spirit had passed the torch to her, and now it was her turn to protect the forest for future generations. She smiled, knowing that the forest's story would never end. It would live on in the hearts of those who came to appreciate it, and in the whispers of the trees that would continue to tell its story for centuries to come. The haunted forest was no longer a place of fear. It was a sanctuary, a place of peace, healing, and timeless legacy. As the years passed, the legend of the haunted forest became a part of the town's soul. People came from far and wide to witness the magic of the woods. They no longer feared the forest. Instead, they celebrated it. The old stories of the hauntings had faded into distant memories, replaced by tales of healing, hope, and renewal. The young guardian grew older, but her love for the forest never wavered. She stood at the edge of the forest one evening, watching the sun set over the trees. The whispers of the past seemed to echo in the wind, as though Max's spirit was still with her, guiding her. "I will keep my promise," she whispered softly to the trees. "This forest will always be protected." One day, as the guardian walked through the woods, she discovered a hidden path, one she had never seen before. The trees were thick, their branches weaving together to form a canopy of shadows. She felt an odd sense of familiarity as she stepped onto the path, as though it had always been there, waiting for her. As she walked, the air grew cooler, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. She realized that this path led to a place she had never known existed. It was an ancient part of the forest, untouched by time, where the secrets of the past still lingered. The guardian paused, wondering if she was meant to discover this hidden part of the forest. The path led her to a beautiful garden, hidden deep within the forest. The flowers here were unlike any she had ever seen before, glowing softly in the dim light. The air smelled sweet, and the ground was covered in lush green moss. It felt like a dream, a place where time stood still. In the center of the garden stood a stone statue of a woman, her eyes closed in peaceful sleep. The guardian approached the statue, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm. She knew this place was special, a secret that the forest had kept for generations. She reached out and gently touched the statue's hand. To her surprise, the stone felt warm, alive with energy. It was as though the statue was waiting for her to awaken something deep within the forest. As her fingers brushed against the statue, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The trees around her rustled, their leaves dancing in the wind. The statue's eyes slowly opened, revealing a gentle, knowing gaze. The guardian stepped back in awe, unsure of what was happening. The statue began to speak, her voice soft but clear. "I am the spirit of the forest, the keeper of its secrets," she said. "You, the chosen guardian, have awakened me. Together, we will protect this forest for all eternity." The guardian's heart raced with wonder and excitement. She had always known there was more to the forest than met the eye, but now, standing before the spirit of the forest, she realized how deep its magic truly ran. The spirit of the forest looked at the young guardian with kindness and wisdom. "You have done well to protect the forest, but now there is more for you to learn. You must become one with the forest, understanding its language, its pulse, its heart." The guardian nodded, feeling a surge of energy flowing through her. The forest was alive in a way she had never truly understood before, its spirit intertwined with hers. She was no longer just a protector, she was a part of the forest itself. The spirit smiled warmly, as though proud of the guardian's growth. "You will lead this forest into the future, just as Max once did. But now, you carry the knowledge of the past and the power to shape its destiny." From that day on, the young guardian was not just the protector of the forest, she had become its spirit, its living heart. She could hear the trees, feel the wind's whispers, and understand the ancient secrets that had been passed down through generations. The forest flourished, growing even more beautiful and vibrant. People from the town visited often, now aware of the deep magic that flowed through the woods. They no longer feared it, but revered it, knowing that it was a living, breathing part of their world. And so, the legacy of the haunted forest continued, passed down from one generation to the next. The guardian, now fully united with the forest, stood as its eternal protector, ensuring that its magic would live on forever. Years passed, and the forest continued to grow, both in beauty and in mystery. The guardian, now a wise woman, watched as new generations came to visit the woods. People who had heard stories of the enchanted forest traveled from distant lands, eager to see for themselves the magic that had been whispered about for so long. Each new visitor left with a piece of the forest's magic in their hearts. Some came seeking answers, others seeking peace, but all left feeling a deep connection to the land. The guardian knew that the forest had a way of choosing those it wished to reveal itself to. The magic of the forest was alive, and it continued to touch the hearts of those who were meant to find it. One evening, as the sun began to set, the guardian sat at the edge of the forest, deep in thought. The trees whispered around her, but tonight the whispers felt different. There was a warning in the air, a sense of unease that she couldn't ignore. "The forest is changing," the wind seemed to say. "Something is coming." The guardian stood up, her heart racing. She had protected the forest for so long, but this new feeling was unlike anything she had ever sensed before. She had always trusted the forest's whispers, but now they seemed to carry a foreboding message. She knew she would need to be ready for whatever was coming. As the days passed, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The animals of the forest became restless. The birds flew in chaotic patterns, and the once peaceful waters of the lake began to stir. The guardian could feel the forest shifting, as though it were preparing for something significant. One night, as a storm rolled in, the sky lit up with flashes of lightning. The wind howled through the trees, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. The guardian stood firm, knowing that this was the moment she had been waiting for. She called out to the forest, asking it to show her the way. The trees answered with a low, rumbling sound, as if the forest was trying to speak to her. She listened carefully, understanding that the time had come for her to act. The storm raged on, and the guardian felt the presence of someone or something moving through the woods. It was unlike any creature she had ever encountered. The air grew colder, and a shadowy figure appeared in the distance, its shape flickering like a wisp of smoke. The figure drew closer, and the guardian's heart skipped a beat. She knew this presence was not of the forest. It was an intruder, something dark and unnatural that had come to disturb the peace of the woods. The guardian stepped forward, determined to protect her home. She spoke calmly, her voice carrying through the wind. "You do not belong here." The shadowy figure stopped, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was silent, as if considering her words. The figure finally spoke, its voice a whisper carried by the wind. "I have come to claim what is mine," it said, its tone cold and threatening. The guardian stood tall, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. "This forest is not yours to claim," she replied firmly. "It belongs to the spirit of the earth, to the trees, to the creatures that live here. You will leave." The shadow seemed to laugh, a hollow, echoing sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You're strong, guardian," it said, "but even the mightiest can be broken with that." The figure began to move closer, its form swirling like smoke. The guardian raised her hands, calling upon the power of the forest. She felt the energy of the trees, the earth, and the sky flow through her, giving her strength. As the shadow approached, the guardian closed her eyes and focused on the heart of the forest. She felt the energy of the ancient trees beneath her feet, the wind around her, and the water of the lake in the distance. She called out to the forest, asking for its help. The forest responded. The trees groaned as if awakening from a long sleep, their branches reaching out toward the dark figure. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with magic. The shadowy figure froze, sensing the overwhelming power of the forest. In an instant, the figure was surrounded by a brilliant light, the forest's magic shining brighter than ever before. The shadow screeched, its form beginning to dissolve into the light. With one final cry, it vanished, leaving nothing but a faint whisper in the wind. The storm cleared, and the forest returned to its peaceful state. The guardian stood tall, her heart still racing, but she knew that the forest had been protected once again. The forest was calm once more, its whispers soft and soothing, like a lullaby carried on the breeze. The guardian stood at the heart of the woods, feeling a deep sense of relief. The dark figure had been banished, but the battle had left its mark. She could still feel the echo of its presence in the air, lingering like a shadow. She walked slowly through the trees, her hand brushing against the ancient bark. The forest felt different now, as if it had been cleansed, its magic more powerful than ever before. The guardian knew that the battle had changed something within her, too. She had grown stronger, more connected to the land, and more certain of her role as its protector. As she walked deeper into the forest, the animals returned to their homes, and the birds began to sing once again. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving a soft, golden light in their wake. The days that followed were filled with peace. The guardian spent her time walking through the forest, feeling the pulse of life around her. The trees whispered their gratitude, and the animals seemed to sense her newfound strength. It was as if the forest itself had healed, its heart beating once more in harmony with the world. The villagers who lived on the outskirts of the forest began to return, no longer fearful of the tales that had once haunted them. They spoke of the guardian with reverence, knowing that she had protected them all from the dark force that had tried to invade their peaceful home. The guardian smiled as she watched the children play near the edge of the woods. They would grow up with a deep respect for the forest and its magic, just as she had. She knew that the legacy of the haunted forest would live on through them. One quiet evening, as the guardian sat by the lake, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. The water shimmered, reflecting the soft glow of the moon. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves dancing in the silver light. It was then that she realized the forest was alive with more than just the whispers of the past. It was alive with dreams. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to drift into a peaceful slumber. As she slept, she dreamed of the forest as it had once been untouched, full of magic and mystery. She saw the spirits of the woods, the ones who had once protected the land, standing tall and proud. They smiled at her, their faces filled with warmth and kindness. In her dream, she knew that the forest had always been there to guide her. It had given her the strength she needed to face the dark forces and had helped her become the guardian she was meant to be. The next morning, the guardian awoke with a sense of purpose. She could hear the soft melody of a song, a tune that seemed to come from the very trees themselves. It was the song of the forest, ancient and beautiful, and it filled her heart with peace. She stood up and walked toward the center of the woods, following the sound of the song. As she moved deeper into the forest, the melody grew louder, guiding her steps. The trees seemed to part for her, their branches bowing in reverence as she passed. The guardian reached the heart of the forest, where a large tree stood, its trunk wide and strong, its branches reaching up to the sky. She placed her hand on the tree, feeling the warmth of its spirit. The song of the forest echoed in her ears, and she understood its meaning. It was a song of life, of love, and of the deep connection between the guardian and the land. The guardian knew that the forest would always be her home, but she also understood that her role was not just to protect it, it was to nurture it, to help it grow and thrive. She would continue to walk its paths, listen to its whispers, and care for the creatures that called it home. But now she knew that the forest was not just her responsibility. It was a gift to be shared with the world. She would teach others about the magic of the woods, helping them understand the importance of living in harmony with nature. The forest had shown her the way, and now it was time for her to pass that knowledge on. The guardian stood tall, feeling the energy of the forest flowing through her. She smiled, knowing that the future of the forest was secure and that she was ready for whatever came next. As the sun began to set, the guardian stood at the edge of the forest, looking out over the land she had sworn to protect. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the trees stood tall and proud against the backdrop of the fading light. She knew that her work was far from over. The forest would always need her watchful eyes, her care, and her love. But she was no longer afraid of what the future held. She had learned that the forest, like life itself, was full of surprises, some dark, some light, but all part of the great cycle of existence. With a final glance at the forest, the guardian turned and walked into the woods, ready to continue her journey. The forest would always be with her, and she would always be its protector. As the days turned into weeks, the guardian continued her watch over the forest, always alert, always ready. But now there was a sense of calm that filled the air. The winds no longer carried the whispers of danger. Instead, they sang a song of peace. The forest had found its balance once more. But there was something else, something the guardian couldn't quite put her finger on. She had begun to notice a presence, a feeling of being watched, but when she turned, there was no one there. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the feeling persisted. She had heard stories of an ancient being who had once protected the forest long before her. Could it be that this being was still watching, ensuring the forest remained safe? The guardian couldn't be sure, but she felt a deep respect for this silent watcher. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the dark sky, a stranger entered the forest. A young man lost and seeking refuge had wandered into the woods. He was tired, hungry, and cold, but there was something in his eyes that intrigued the guardian. The man walked carefully, aware of the legends surrounding the haunted forest, but also drawn to its mysterious beauty. He had heard the stories of the forest's guardian and its magic, and now, standing beneath the towering trees, he could feel its presence. The guardian watched from the shadows, her eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. She felt no threat from this stranger, only curiosity. Perhaps, like so many others, he was meant to discover the forest's secrets. The young man made his way deeper into the woods, his steps light and hesitant. He spoke softly to the trees, as if asking for their permission to pass. The forest, sensing his respect, allowed him to move freely. After a time, he came upon a clearing where a small stream flowed peacefully. The moonlight danced on the water's surface, creating a serene and magical atmosphere. The man knelt beside the stream, cupping his hands to drink from the cool, clear water. As he drank, a voice whispered in his ear. It was soft, like the rustling of leaves, but he knew it wasn't just the wind. It was the guardian of the forest speaking to him. "You are welcome here," the voice said. "But remember, the forest gives and it takes. Treat it with respect, and it will guide you." The man, startled by the voice, looked around, but saw no one. He wondered if it had been his imagination. But then he felt a warm sensation in his chest, as if the forest itself had accepted him. It was a comforting feeling, one he hadn't known he was missing. As he sat by the stream, he thought about the tales he had heard about the haunted forest, the creatures, the magic, the whispers. He had always believed the stories were nothing more than myths. But now he wasn't so sure. There was something undeniably magical about this place. Suddenly the wind shifted, and the trees around him seemed to bend in a way that felt almost deliberate. He felt as if the forest was trying to tell him something, urging him to listen closely. The guardian, still unseen, watched the man closely. She knew he was special. There was something about him that the forest had recognized. The trees seemed to be guiding him, opening paths where there were none, leading him deeper into the woods. The man followed the path, feeling a strange pull in his chest. He walked for what seemed like hours, though the forest never felt dark or threatening. It was as if the forest itself was lighting the way for him. Eventually, he came to a small, hidden clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, ancient and weathered by time. On the pedestal rested a glowing crystal, its light pulsating softly. The man approached the crystal, feeling its warmth radiating out toward him. He reached out, touching the crystal, and in that moment, he felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced. As the young man touched the crystal, he felt a deep connection to the forest, as though he was part of something much greater than himself. The crystal's light brightened and a vision appeared before his eyes. He saw the guardian of the forest, standing tall and strong, her eyes filled with wisdom and power. The vision spoke, its voice gentle but commanding. "You have been chosen," it said. "The forest has called to you, and you must answer. Protect this land, honor its magic, and it will guide you to your true purpose." The man stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of the words. He felt an undeniable sense of responsibility, as though the forest had entrusted him with a sacred mission. The crystal's light faded, leaving him standing alone in the clearing, his heart filled with a new understanding. As the man stood in the clearing, the forest around him seemed to come alive. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying gently. He felt a strange pull in his heart, as though something deep within the forest was calling to him. He glanced at the crystal again, which now lay dim and quiet on the stone pedestal. It had given him a message, but what did it mean? The weight of the words, "The forest has called to you," lingered in his mind. What was his purpose here? The man looked up, his eyes scanning the dark woods. The guardian was still watching, hidden in the shadows, waiting for him to understand. But there was no time to waste. He had a new purpose now, one he couldn't ignore. With the crystal's message echoing in his mind, the man decided to walk deeper into the forest. Each step felt heavy, as if the earth itself was testing him. The path ahead was unclear, yet he knew he had to continue. The trees stretched high above him, their leaves rustling as if sharing secrets. The air was thick with magic, and for the first time, he felt a deep connection to this ancient place. The forest was not just alive, it was waiting for him to embrace its mysteries. He did not know what he would find at the end of the path, but he knew he had to face it. The guardian's message had been clear: this was his journey, and only courage would guide him. As the man ventured deeper, the forest grew darker. The path twisted and turned, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than before. The wind howled, its voice now filled with a warning. The peaceful energy of earlier had shifted, replaced by a tense, uneasy atmosphere. Something was not right. The man's instincts told him to be cautious, yet he pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the forest. He could feel the guardian's watchful presence, but it wasn't comforting. It felt as though something or someone was following him. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed from behind him. He spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing. The forest was quiet again, but the feeling of being watched remained. The man took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He knew that in the haunted forest, things were not always what they seemed. There were dark forces here, forces that had been hidden for centuries. But he was determined to find answers, no matter the cost. As he moved forward, he felt an overwhelming sense of being surrounded. The trees seemed to close in on him, their branches casting long, twisted shadows across the path. He couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was lurking just beyond his sight. The forest was full of ancient magic, and he was now part of it. But what magic would he encounter on this journey? Would it be a blessing, or would it lead him into danger? In the distance, the man saw a faint glow. It was different from the moonlight. This glow seemed to pulse with life. Drawn to it, he quickened his pace, his feet moving faster through the darkening woods. As he neared the source of the light, he discovered a hidden grove, untouched by time. At the center of the grove was an ancient tree, its bark covered in strange markings. The glow came from a large crystal embedded in the tree's trunk. The man felt an intense pull toward the crystal, as if it were calling to him. With trembling hands, he touched the crystal. Instantly, a vision filled his mind, a vision of the forest's past, of the guardian before him, and the spirits that had once roamed these lands. The secret of the forest was now clear to him. He was not just a visitor. He was a protector, chosen to guard the ancient magic. The man stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The vision had shown him everything: the guardian's role, the magic of the forest, and the ancient pact that had been made long ago. He was no longer just a stranger to these woods. He was now bound to them, tied by the magic that flowed through every tree, every leaf, and every stone. But there was still a choice to make. Would he accept his destiny as the forest's protector, or would he walk away from this calling and return to his old life? The decision weighed heavily on him, but deep down he knew there was only one choice he could make. He could hear the forest whispering to him, urging him to choose wisely. The guardian's presence was felt even more strongly now. She was waiting for him to decide, and once he did, his journey would truly begin. The man stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The forest, with all its ancient magic, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to choose. He could feel the power of the crystal pulsing in his hand, as if urging him forward. With the guardian by his side, the man felt his connection to the forest deepen. It was as if the very trees, the rocks, and the rivers were speaking to him, guiding him in ways he could never have imagined. He could feel the forest's heartbeat beneath his feet, and its ancient magic flowed through him, filling him with strength and purpose. The guardian spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "The forest has tested you, and you have passed. Now, you must learn its ways. Only then will you truly understand the magic that lies within these woods." The man listened carefully, knowing that this was just the beginning of his journey. The forest had secrets, and he was ready to uncover them, one by one. Days passed, and the man began to learn the ways of the forest. The guardian taught him how to listen to the whispers of the trees, how to speak the ancient language of the forest's creatures, and how to protect its magic from those who would seek to destroy it. But there was one thing he had not yet learned: the true power of the forest's magic. And soon he would face a challenge that would test everything he had learned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned dark, and the air grew heavy. The man felt a strange energy in the air, a disturbance that sent shivers down his spine. It was then that the guardian spoke. "The forest is under threat," she said, her voice urgent. "An ancient evil has awoken, and it seeks to destroy all that we hold dear." The man's heart raced as the guardian's words sank in. He had known that the forest was filled with both light and darkness, but he had never imagined that such an evil force could rise again. The guardian took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the forest around them. "This force is ancient, more powerful than anything we have faced. It was sealed away long ago, but now it is free. You must help me stop it before it consumes everything." The man stood tall, determination flashing in his eyes. He had been chosen to protect the forest, and he would do whatever it took to keep it safe. Together, with the guardian by his side, he would face this dark force. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The man could feel the dark presence drawing closer, and the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders grew heavier. He was ready, but he knew that this would be no easy fight. The guardian's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay focused. The forest is with you. Do not let fear cloud your judgment." As the man moved through the trees, the first signs of the dark force began to reveal themselves, strange shadows that twisted and writhed in the corners of his vision. The air grew colder, and the very ground beneath his feet seemed to shudder with the evil that was approaching. The battle for the forest's future had begun. The man moved deeper into the forest, his senses on high alert. The dark force was near, its presence felt in the way the wind shifted and the ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. Every step he took seemed to lead him closer to the evil that threatened the forest. The guardian walked beside him, her eyes scanning the shadows. "It is not just the creatures of the forest that you must protect," she said. "It is the very heart of the forest, its soul. Without it, nothing here will survive." The man nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always thought of the forest as just trees and animals, but now he understood. The forest was alive, more than just a collection of plants and rocks. It was a living entity, and he was its protector. As they walked, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to lose their vibrancy, their leaves curling and darkening, as if they were being drained of life. The sounds of the forest grew silent, the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of birds replaced by an eerie stillness. Then the man saw it. In the distance, a figure cloaked in darkness moved through the trees. It was not a creature of the forest, it was something else, something evil. The man's heart raced as he realized the battle had truly begun. "We need to act quickly," the guardian said, her voice filled with urgency. "That is just the beginning. The dark force is awakening, and we must stop it before it spreads." The shadowy figure vanished into the trees, leaving the man and the guardian to continue their journey. The man's mind raced with thoughts of what they had just seen. The dark force was real, and it was not just a physical presence, it was something more sinister, a spirit of pure evil that had been waiting for the right moment to strike. "Do you know what this creature is?" the man asked, his voice trembling. "It is an ancient spirit, one that has existed since the beginning of the forest," the guardian replied. "It feeds on fear and darkness, and it can twist the very nature of the forest. We must stop it before it can consume everything." The man clenched his fists, ready to face whatever came next. He had chosen to protect the forest, and now he had to prove he was worthy of that responsibility. As the man and the guardian pressed forward, the forest began to react. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches whispering in the wind. The very earth beneath their feet seemed to shift, as if the forest itself was preparing for the battle ahead. The guardian turned to him, her face solemn. The forest has always had a bond with its protectors. It is alive, and it knows what is coming. We must trust it to guide us through the darkness. The man nodded, though he wasn't sure what that would mean. How could a forest, full of ancient magic, help them fight a force so evil and powerful? But he trusted the guardian. She had seen and experienced things he couldn't even imagine. As they moved deeper into the heart of the forest, the dark presence grew stronger. The trees began to wither and die, their once lush leaves turning black. The air became thick and heavy, and the ground seemed to crack beneath their feet. Suddenly, a chilling laughter echoed through the woods. It was low and menacing, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The dark spirit had found them. The guardian raised her hands, a soft glow emanating from her fingertips. "Stay close to me," she said. "We must confront it together." The man nodded, fear gnawing at his insides, but he didn't hesitate. This was his fight now, and he would not back down. A figure appeared before them, cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing red with malice. It was the spirit, the source of the evil that had been threatening the forest. The man could feel its power, a cold, oppressive force that made his chest tighten. "Who dares to stand in my way?" the spirit hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers, each one filled with hatred. "We are the protectors of this forest," the guardian replied, her voice steady. "You will not destroy what has existed for centuries." The man stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the forest around him, its magic flowing through his veins, giving him strength. "This is our home," he said, his voice strong, "and we will fight for it." The battle had begun, and the man knew that this would not be easy. But he was ready. With the guardian by his side and the forest's power flowing through him, he would face the darkness and protect the forest at all costs. The dark spirit's eyes glowed brighter, its laughter echoing through the forest like a cruel melody. The man could feel its power pressing against him, trying to break his will. But he stood strong, feeling the magic of the forest pulsing in his veins. He was not alone. The guardian stood beside him, her hands raised, her eyes focused. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy. "We must fight with all our strength," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. The man nodded, determined. He raised his hands, feeling the forest's magic respond to his touch. The trees seemed to stretch toward him, their branches swaying in the wind. The ground beneath his feet pulsed with power. Together, they would face the darkness. The dark spirit let out a howl of fury and moved towards them, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. It lunged, its hands reaching out to grab them, to destroy them. The man felt a cold chill in the air as the spirit drew near. But he wasn't afraid. He had the forest's magic, and he would use it. He stretched out his hand, calling on the power of the ancient trees. A wall of light appeared between them and the spirit, pushing it back. The spirit screeched in anger, but it couldn't break through. The guardian smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "You're learning quickly," she said. "Now, we must strike." The guardian raised both hands high, and the air around them shimmered with golden light. She spoke in an ancient language, the words flowing like a song. The trees around them began to glow, their leaves sparkling with magic. The dark spirit recoiled, its form flickering as if it were being torn apart by the light. "No," it screamed, its voice full of rage and fear. I will not be defeated. The man could feel the power building inside him, the forest's magic swelling around him. He joined the guardian, chanting words he didn't fully understand. But he didn't need to. The forest was guiding him, helping him fight. The spirit, enraged, summoned dark tendrils of shadow that reached out to grab them. The tendrils wrapped around the man's legs, pulling him toward the spirit. The man struggled, feeling the coldness of the shadows trying to drain him of his strength. "Hold on," the guardian shouted, her voice sharp with command. She stretched out her hand, and a wave of light washed over the tendrils, burning them away. The darkness hissed and recoiled. The man fought back, his heart racing, the forest's power flowing through him like a river. He had to stay focused. They couldn't let the spirit win. The battle raged on, but the tide was beginning to turn. The dark spirit, once so powerful, seemed to be weakening. The light from the guardian's magic was pushing it back, and the forest was fighting alongside them. The trees creaked and groaned, their roots stretching into the ground, binding the dark spirit's power. The man could feel it. The spirit was losing its strength, its hold on the forest slipping away. "It's working," the man said, his voice full of hope. "The forest is helping us," the guardian nodded. "The forest is alive. It will fight to protect itself. We must keep pushing." With the forest's magic at his side, the man felt a surge of power. The dark spirit was weaker now, its form flickering, its once bright eyes dimming. The man knew this was their chance. He raised his hand, focusing all the energy of the forest into one final strike. The trees around him bent low, their branches reaching out toward the spirit, pulling it in. The ground rumbled as the forest's magic built to a crescendo. With a shout, the man released the energy, sending a blast of pure light toward the spirit. It screamed in agony, its form disintegrating into the air as the light consumed it. The forest trembled, but the dark presence was gone. The battle was over. The forest stood still, the air thick with the scent of the earth. The battle was over, but the man felt uneasy. He looked around, seeing the once dark and twisted trees now returning to their natural state, their leaves beginning to regain their color. The guardian stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "The battle is won, but the forest is scarred. It will need time to heal," the man nodded. He could feel the weight of the victory, but it also felt like the beginning of something more. "How long will it take?" "Time is not the same for the forest," she replied, her voice soft. "It heals, but the scars remain. We must ensure that the darkness never returns." As they walked through the forest, the trees seemed to bow toward them, their branches low, as if thanking the man and the guardian for their protection. The ground beneath their feet felt firmer, more stable, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The guardian turned to the man. "The forest is alive more than you know. It remembers everything. It knows who protected it," the man smiled, feeling a deep connection with the trees, the earth, and everything around him. He had fought for the forest, but now he felt like part of it. The forest had become his home, and he would protect it for as long as he lived. Though the battle had ended, the forest still felt heavy with the aftermath of the spirit's presence. The air was thick, and the man could sense the lingering darkness that had once consumed it. The trees had returned to their natural state, but the damage done was still visible. The guardian knelt beside one of the trees, her fingers brushing against the bark. "The forest is healing, but it will take time," she said. The dark spirit may be gone, but the magic it left behind still lingers. The man looked around, seeing the once vibrant forest now shrouded in a quiet sadness. It would take time, but with the Guardian's help, the forest would recover. And they would be there, guarding it every step of the way. The man turned to the Guardian. What happens now? What do we do? The Guardian's gaze was steady. Now, we wait. The forest will guide us. We must remain vigilant, for there will always be darkness that threatens to return, but we will protect it together. The man nodded, feeling the weight of his new responsibility. He had chosen to be the forest's protector, and now he understood the true meaning of that promise. It wasn't just about fighting darkness, it was about keeping the balance, ensuring that the forest could thrive, free from harm. Days passed, and the forest began to show signs of life once again. New leaves sprouted from the branches, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds and insects. It was as if the battle had never happened, but the man knew that the forest would never forget. He walked beside the Guardian, feeling a deep sense of peace. The magic of the forest flowed through him, and he knew that he was part of something much larger than himself. He was not just a protector, he was a part of the forest's story, its future. And he would always be there, watching over it, ensuring that the darkness would never return. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, the man stood at the edge of the forest. He had fought for its survival, and now the forest was safe. But he knew his journey was far from over. "Are you ready?" the Guardian asked, her voice soft. The man turned to her, his heart full of purpose. "Yes, I'm ready. The forest needs me, and I will always be here for it." Together, they walked deeper into the heart of the forest, the ancient trees towering above them, their branches whispering in the wind. The darkness had been defeated, but the forest's magic was eternal. And the man, the Guardian, and the forest would always be one. As the man and the Guardian ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the air felt alive with a promise of peace and protection. The darkness had been driven away, but the bond between the forest and its guardians remained unbreakable, stronger than ever before. The trees whispered their secrets, the earth hummed with ancient magic, and the man knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the forest would always stand tall, its heart forever entwined with his own. And so, the journey continued. For some, it was the end of a tale, but for others, it was just the beginning. The forest would always be watched over, its secrets kept safe, as long as there were those brave enough to listen to its whispers in the midnight wind. Until next time, remember that even in the darkest places, light can always find a way through. All you need is the courage to face it.